right. So welcome to the Health Babes podcast, Steph. So for everybody who doesn't know her, this is Steph Gaudreau. She's a certified intuitive eating counselor and nutritional therapy practitioner who helps women break up with diet so they can finally feel free to eat. In her best-selling book, The Core Four, she details a 4-pillar approach to building health, embracing your body, and owning your power. Steph is trained in biology and human physiology and is a nutritional therapy practitioner, certified intuitive eating counselor, and USA weightlifting sports performance coach. Her weekly podcast, the Listen to Your Body podcast, has 3+ million downloads. She's an international speaker that has been featured in Outside, Mind, Body, Green, Self, and ESPN Radio. Awesome. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
That's a lot of downloads.
It is. It's awesome.
It's a trip because sometimes we'll put up the Apple TV. We don't have a TV, but we have just a projector and it projects on the wall, and we'll have the Apple TV up, and every once in a while it'll sort of like go by the podcast. And I'm like, I have a podcast and it's on iTunes. Like, what is
right?
Yeah,
I know.
it's really, it's cool.
It is cool.
I'm always reminded a little bit of Peter Parker, with great power comes great responsibility. Sort of like I'm putting, just like y'all putting things out into the world for people to hear and listen to. And it just reminds me that I love this job, and it's a big role. So.
Yeah. In 6 years, you said, right?
Yes. I started the podcast in June of 2015.
Wow.
So to continue to do it, and we've changed and evolved over time and changed the focus a little bit, and had guests and no guests and 2 podcasts a week and 1 podcast a week, but it's evolved, and it's just such a pleasure to be able to connect with people, to be able to introduce my community to people who are experts in things I'm not an expert in, but are related and complementary to what I do, and just be able to reach people in that way is really cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, Steph. So there's many people talking about this, but there's many versions, I think, of what intuitive eating actually means.
Sure.
So why don't you talk to us about what, like, how did you get into it, and what exactly is intuitive eating?
Okay, I'm going to answer that question in reverse. So intuitive eating, as it's written, is really a framework that comes from Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch. They're 2 registered dietitians who really published the first book back in 1995. So just to give some perspective, I was like a junior in high school at that point. So, when I was in high school, this book came out about intuitive eating, and it's really a self-care eating framework. And so what that means is a way to eat in a way that cares for your body, nourishes your body, without all of the restrictive rules and all of the diet mentality that we know is so prevalent in our country, really in the world, is this diet culture mentality. So there are 10 principles, and those were all created by Evelyn and Elise, and they range from reject the diet mentality all the way through honoring your body with gentle nutrition. So that's kind of the formal, definition. Mm-hmm. But the way I like to say what intuitive eating is just eating. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean to simplify it like that or downplay it, but what I mean by that is it's a way of eating that is free from all of these rules, all of these shoulds, all of these things that keep us stuck and stressed. And at the end of the day, if the way we're eating is causing us stress and anxiety and social isolation and worry, and sort of we're on the wagon, off the wagon, there's guilt, shame, we're feeling that mental emotional strain, we're not able to find stability, is that really a healthy way of eating for us?
Right.
So that's kind of at its core what it is. And the way that I'm really interested in using intuitive eating now is finding a way to help women who want to get stronger. So they're lifting weights, they care about their fitness, they're making efforts. But a lot of the times people tell me, I'm not seeing the results from, I'm putting in all this hard work, but why is nothing changing? And oftentimes nutrition is a key component of that, as you know. And so what I'm really interested in is helping women understand that in order to build strength, in order to have energy, in order to see performance, and these are not elite athletes, but they're, women like all of us who want to feel better in their bodies, want to feel stronger. In order to do those things, you need to eat enough food. You need to think about some general guidelines, things like getting enough protein, for example, and do it in a way that you can consistently implement these habits that also allow you to have a really good relationship with food. Mm-hmm. And so I'm sort of trying to bring both of these worlds together, because at the end of the day, if you want to implement healthy habits, but you're not able to be consistent, or, you keep having this, like, I'm going to use air quotes, beliefs and the thoughts that you have around food and the way you've always related to food, we need to also bring in that aspect too. So I'm really kind of doing both. And that comes from a very personal experience. It really mirrors my own life experience, which was on and off every diet you can imagine. Mm-hmm. And then in my sort of early 20s, finding endurance sports and really not eating enough to fuel my body. I mean, I was getting smaller and smaller, but to me, it was never enough. I just wanted to lose weight at all costs. And in about 2010, that kind of all came to a head. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. So I switched to weightlifting. I started, like eating a more real food approach. And that was a stepping stone for me. And then a few years into that, I realized I have all of these food rules and all of these beliefs about food and my body and the way it should be and how I should eat. And it's not helping me at all. So I had to really go through the process of teasing all that apart, and ended up really doing, my own version of intuitive eating. So I really feel like bringing those two worlds together is what I was meant to do.
Yeah. I feel like, the same, for, at least Krystal and I practice together. And I feel like what we try to do with our patients is not restrict them as far as any kind of calories, macros, what you look like, anything like that. But it's, how do foods make you feel? If you feel really terrible after you eat something, don't eat that. Mm-hmm. So it's trying to, and that's how I have to be. I could never count macros. If you asked me to count macros, I would jump off a bridge. Like it just wouldn't work for me, because it would be too much emphasis on what I'm eating. For me, I just know what foods make me feel well and know what foods don't. And I eat when I want to eat, and I don't eat when I don't want to eat. But I do, I think, people definitely undereat. And if you're, doing a lot of exercise, you have to eat enough to be able to do what you're putting your body through, for sure. So yeah, that makes so much sense.
Yeah. And just to kind of play off what you said there, a lot of people will say things like that. They're like, hey, and for me, I'll give you a perfect example, personal example, peppers, bell peppers do not sit well with my body. They mm-hmm. never have. Mm-hmm. So I don't eat bell peppers. Now, does that mean I'm restricting bell peppers and I'm, I'm doing things wrong and I'm betraying intuitive eating? Of course not, right? And N equals one, personal experience is really, really important. So the way I kind of like to remind people about, like, what is the overall goal of intuitive eating? We have external health values. We have external information that's valid information. We have evidence-based information. We have this whole world of like the external stuff. And what we're trying to really do is also bring in the internal attunement, your internal body signals, the things, the foods that you like, and all of those things, and really marry them together and find the overlap. Because in our current state of nutrition in general, we're all living for the external. It's just like, follow this diet, do these rules, blah, blah, blah. And there's no, eat this many calories, eat this many macros. And I've done all of that, right? I've eaten to my macros for the day and been so hungry, right? And so we kind of think about, we need to kind of find the happy medium between these 2 points. So yeah, if you have a food that doesn't work for your body, of course, don't keep eating that food. Yeah. But at the same time, if it's all just a bunch of external, fad diet or this and that, you have to kind of take it back and think, what is really working for me? And am I, like you said, am I eating enough food? And really trying to just find a gentle place of being with your body, I think is the big thing. And I have had a discussion in the last few days about 1,200 calorie diets. And I've had a couple of people push back on me about it. And I'm thinking, okay, but if that was really effective for you, why are you back up? Like, why do you have to keep coming, back to restriction past that if it's really working for you? And so it's just, can we pull back and take a look at what we're doing and bring those different elements in? And it's different for everybody.
Yeah, it is. And I have a friend who just started counting macros, and she was with me recently and she was like, oh my gosh, I still have to eat whatever, 40 more grams of fat. And it was like bedtime. And I was like, why, why do you have to eat 40 more? Cause your app says to. I'm like, if you're stuffed, don't. Like, I think it can go both ways. I think some people undereat, but I think also you can be forced like, oh gosh, I still have to hit this number. And to me, it just feels like and not for everybody. Some people do really well counting macros, but for me, and I think many people, it just isn't maybe the healthiest mindset.
Yeah, it definitely comes down to a cost benefit analysis, and it's really personal. So if somebody has a history of disordered eating, I'm going to be really reluctant to recommend that they start going down that road, because anytime you're giving people those external things, and of course it's nuanced. If somebody is in, some kind of recovery, for example, they might have certain goals that they are supposed to meet for the day because they would tend to not eat. So it's just really important that you think about, have I had a long-term history of dieting? What tends to happen if I have my Fitness Pal on my phone? Is it just there and I kind of, it's okay? Or what happens if I miss a day of logging my food? Do I get stressed about it? Do I get upset? Do I think I'm failing? And, I would say the vast majority of people that I have worked with, it's not a healthy tool long-term. There are other ways that you can develop awareness around what you're putting on your plate, because I know for a lot of folks, especially in the last year, when we have stress and anxiety, a lot of times we don't want to eat, or we don't feel like eating because our bodies are not in that state to be receptive to food. And so a lot of people tend to get busy, or they are stressed, or they just undereat. And so really taking a look at, what are some of the other ways to build awareness into your day other than numerically tracking? There are other ways to do that.
Yeah. So with your the core 4 pillars in your book, right? So how do you get your clients or your patients started off with, eating nourishing foods? Like, how do you walk them through that? I know.
That's a big question. And if I'm working one-on-one with somebody, it's really personal to them and sort of what their goals are. And when I'm working with somebody one-on-one, I'm bringing them in and we're talking about overall nutrition stuff. So we're looking at, what does an average day of food look like for you? We'll do maybe a food and mood journal and take a look at, what is the timing and spacing of your meals? I'm not asking them to track. Usually what I ask people to do is to take a picture of what they're eating and send that picture to me so I can get a visual. That way they don't have to count, they don't have to weigh anything. And then to also connect to things like, what is their mood like? What is their energy level like as they're going? Because that can give us a lot of information. And then from there, I also have them look at their relationship with food. And so we bring in some of the intuitive eating principles and we assess that. And we say, let's look at these two pools of information. For most people, what we'll do is we'll take an overall look at what is something we can add in, an adding first approach. Because normally if people are coming in and they've had a history of dieting or a history of disordered eating, they're going to be used to restricting. And when we have restriction, the body and the brain start to ramp up our awareness of food, our thinking about food, our desire for food. And so we want to calm the body and calm the mind a little bit and say, okay, let's focus on what can we add in? And so I take a very client-driven approach as well. I use a lot of motivational interviewing, and we say, what's something you want to add in? Let's take a look here at what are some of the gaps, and then we go from there. If it's just, if somebody's reading the book or somebody's in the online community, I would still have them do the same thing. What's something you want to add in? And we know that there are certain, anchors in the day. Protein is obviously an important one. Things like vegetables, can we add in an extra serving of vegetables? You want to try a new vegetable. Getting in that fiber is certainly, an important thing. If we add a little bit more protein here, are we skipping a meal here? Can we add a little something to get started that's really palatable for you and easy to digest? And it doesn't feel like you're chomping down a whole big bowl of salad. For a lot of people, if they usually skip lunch, the idea of sitting down to a trough of raw salad might not seem appealing to them. So it's let's take that approach where we're adding things in rather than just focusing on taking stuff away.
No, that is really a good approach.
I love it.
So, okay, talk to us about movement, because movement is extremely important for every single person, I believe. So how do you, encourage people to move with intention?
I would say that there's two things, and there's kind of two levels here of where we could think about adding things in. It's a little bit easier with movement to think about adding something because it's typically not somewhere where we think about taking things away.
Right.
However, we want to look for what is a barrier to entry for people. If you, for example, have taken some time off from moving, starting off with saying, I'm going to run a 10K today is probably not going to be the best place to start. And even if you could, your body's going to be so sore. The next day, you are not going to want to move past that. You're going to say, that was too hard. I feel like, terrible in my body. I need to take time away. So I just finished this actually with my membership group where we did a month. This is the end of April. We did a month of daily intentional movement. 5 minutes a day would be the starting point. And it sounds like 5 minutes. I mean, does that even count? Yeah, absolutely. So that counts. And what we challenge people to do is just to get out if they live in a place where they can get outdoors, if they have a yard or an open space near them, go out, get some walking, and post in the community so we could see what everybody else was doing. And it was a really great way to just kind of get the momentum going. So in general, I would think about low key movement. So walking is so great. I know it's not 100% accessible for everybody, but if you're looking for a way to just get going, let's shrink the change down. Let's make the barrier to entry really low. It's another way to get people moving because you usually don't have to go change into special clothes. You don't have to even necessarily change the footwear you're wearing. And I have a client right now who's working on that. It's like, how can I just go without having to overcome all these other barriers? So moving in a low key way every day, start with a small amount of time, is just a great way to get going. And then beyond that, now that I think everybody in this podcast right now here today is probably over 30, then once we hit 30, no, it's the 15th anniversary of my 25th birthday.
Yes.
I'm 42, so I don't have any shame in saying that. And as we hit about 30, we start to lose things like muscle mass and bone mineral density, especially if we're women because of, the effects of declining estrogen and things like that. So strength training or some kind of resistance training or weight bearing exercise is really, really important. And it's never too late. There's recent research that's come out to support that we can actually remineralize bone through things like strength training and weight bearing exercise, resistance training, even if we've start to get into the process of decline. And so that's really, really important because building up a reserve of muscle is so important for longevity, being able to be mobile and active and have, good balance, good coordination. I mean, we always probably make fun of that commercial from when we were kids of I've fallen and I can't get up, but that's a real thing. And those types of injuries, though they may not be happening to people, who are 40, we're setting the stage for things that are going to happen later on. And so, strength training I know can be really scary and intimidating for people, but if you can do it 2 or 3 times a week, a simple regimen, like 30 minutes or less, oftentimes even less than that, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, you're putting insurance. It's like you're buying insurance, or you're putting money in the bank and saving it for later in terms of that muscle and that bone mineral density. And that's just, it's such a huge payoff. So we have kind of we're working our muscle, we're improving our strength on one side, and then we get that sort of low intensity, steady state walking, things that are really gentle. And if you have, for example, hypothyroidism, and Dr. Becky was on the podcast not too long ago talking about hypothyroidism, or, you have a chronic condition where you're looking to kind of get back into movement, but you're not ready to jump around and do high intensity and stuff like that. Some simple strength training, resistance training, whether it's with your body weight bands, you want to introduce some weights, can have such a benefit for you because it's not going to, necessarily send your stress hormones into overdrive. So there's a lot of things to consider there, but I think overall, in general, if you can shoot for 2 or 3 days of resistance training a week, and then, daily, as much as you can, get some low key movement like walking or playing outside or whatever it is, that's such a great balance, especially as we're getting older, to support our bodies.
I love your videos too of you helping people with their form. I do. It's really good. It's nice. Yeah.
Well, it matters.
Yes, it does.
I'm kind of on a low key mission to make sure that people have good information, because it's tough. It's tough if you're learning movement from a distance and you don't have a coach right there to help you out. I mean, it's just awkward at first. You're not sure how to move your body through space. And at the same time, this is my bone that I'm going to pick. I see really prolific celebrity trainers who we won't name. I see really prolific resources and websites on the internet. Healthline is one I'll mention, where they demonstrate. These are heavily viewed, heavily trafficked websites. They're massive. They have a lot of people looking, and they're showing form and technique that's just flat out wrong. Yeah. And I kind of think, can we do better than this? And so oftentimes what I'll have is people say, I've tried to do this movement. Like I tried to do a body weight squat or something like that, and I just feel so strange in my body, and it feels like I'm going to fall over. And so I stopped doing it. And I think, if we can tweak things a little bit and get you moving and having it feel good, you're going to be more likely to implement that and get the benefit from these functional types of movement. Because every time you sit on the toilet, every time you sit to a chair or a bench, every time you get up and down off the floor, you're doing that squat movement pattern. And so those are the things that I try to help people with. Every time you pick up a child off the floor, or you pick up a bag of dog food, you're doing a hinge movement. Every time you put something heavy away over your head, I think about getting on an airplane, which I know we're not all doing right now still, but every time I go on an airplane and I'm thinking, every time I put that bag up there, I'm doing an overhead press, right? I'm carrying my groceries from the car. That's a functional movement.
Right.
And if we can help people approach that and get a little bit stronger on the daily, they're going to be better at life. They're going to be better at moving through life, not just lifting weights for the sake of lifting weights.
Right.
I think that a lot of people, one of the biggest fears of getting older is losing your independence. And I think that if you can do some strength training, endurance training, like you're talking about, that will keep you independent for much, much longer. And that's one really big key of a reason why people should, be open to this. And then, even just like you're saying, lifting overhead in the airplane and doing it, there's a lot of joint injuries and neck injuries and back injuries. And so people need to be doing it properly. So it is really important to make sure not only that you're doing it, but that you're doing it with the correct form so you don't hurt yourself.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting because as we do get older and keeping that movement going, I feel like when we slow down and we stop, it's so much harder to get going again. Yeah. I had the good fortune of interviewing upwards of almost 75 people in the fall about sort of their biggest concerns about health and well-being. And the number one thing and they were almost all women, the number one thing that women said, I thought it was going to be more of a vanity thing, but the number one thing that women said they were worried about was losing their independence as they got older. So it was sort of, there was a lot of people that said, I've watched my grandmother, I've watched my father or whoever it is, really become very limited in what they can do or become very isolated because they have to stay home. And that for a lot of people was like the deep fear that they had was, like the surface, the body changing on the outside wasn't really what was driving people. What's driving people is to stay well enough to be able to be mobile or independent and live a full life for as long as they can. That was really the driver.
That makes a lot of sense.
It really does. So talk to us a little bit how we can recharge our energy.
Oh gosh. Yeah. I think this is a tough one for people because we're just pulled in so many different directions.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when I work with people, what I'm really trying to help them look at are what are some of the big kind of flashing neon signs throughout your day that are asking for a little bit of attention. So certainly sleep is an important thing here. I don't want to actually focus too much on this because I think most people know the drill. They're like, sleep hygiene, got my blue light blocking glasses. And there's definitely some low hanging fruit there to make your sleep hygiene better. But I feel like we've heard all of that stuff before. And so when I'm talking to people about energy, I'm also having them think about the structure of their day, because from the concept that as we sleep in roughly 90-minute cycles. But when we wake up, those cycles don't just stop. In fact, those cycles continue throughout our day. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of people experience like a 3 p.m. energy crash, is because we have these 90-minute cycles that keep going throughout our day. They're called ultradian rhythms. And so what I'm trying to get people to think about is, when I get to take a break from my work throughout the day, what am I doing to recharge my energy in the daytime? In other words, just forcing yourself. We've all had this experience where like, I'm sitting at the computer, I am so in the zone, I am getting my work done, I feel like a boss, I'm just focused. And then after about 2 hours, if you notice, you're like, oh, I'll just go, what's happening on Facebook? Oh, I'm going to go check my email, right? Like, going to go on Instagram, I'm going to see what's happening over here. And what we realize is we need a little bit of a break. So powering through and things like that tend not to work for people in the long term. And so one of the things I would say here for energy is think about, when can you take a break? Can you get up and stretch? Can you take your eyes off the computer or the phone for a few minutes and like let your eyes just relax? Can you go out and get a little bit of fresh air? Can you stop and take a break to eat a little bit or take a snack or get a drink or something like that? Just to step away from the stuff that's requiring your intense focus. And when you do that, you'll be surprised, if you can do that a few times in the day, how much better you feel at the end of the day. I'm sure we've all had that experience where we're like, I've been at my computer for 8 hours and I feel like I got nothing done.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're kind of faffing around on Facebook and like we got distracted. And that's because our energy needs to be brought back up a little bit, because you're not a computer that you're, we can't just plug in our power cord, right? We need to actually take that break throughout the day.
Love that.
Yep.
So talk to us about empowering your minds, because I think that's extremely important.
Oh gosh. I mean, I feel like this is a lifetime of practice. How, our inner world can shape our outer world in terms of our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. And I think one of the biggest things that comes up for the people that I work with in my community is, and I'll just pick one because this category of topic can just go in a million directions, but all or nothing thinking is such a huge thing in our world. And there are many origins of all or nothing thinking. But one of the things I help my clients do is develop their mental flexibility. Because if we take it back to food, especially, one of the reasons why we get stuck in the cycle of dieting, or we get, I'm on the wagon, I'm off the wagon, is because we think, oh, I said I was going to be good, using air quotes. Right? I said I was going to be good. I ate that dessert. I messed it all up. So might as well just keep going, right?
Throw in the towel.
Yeah. I fell off the wagon. I screwed it up. So not only sometimes is there, well, if I ate this one thing, I might as well just eat all the things that I've been depriving myself of. And then I'm going to feel really crappy in my body. And I'm going to have the guilt and the shame that come in. And so then I also feel bad mentally and emotionally. And I'm just get really back in a low place. I think, what can I do to fix this? I'll restrict my food again, right? I'll be good. And so you can see how this cycle keeps going. So developing that mental flexibility is so important, to have the resilience in those times where you didn't eat perfectly, or you ate, a dessert, that instead of throwing in the towel, you go, okay, well, did I take the time and actually savor and enjoy that? Would I choose something else next time? Can I get back to, my meat and veggies and the things I know that are going to really be nourishing and like carry my energy through the day? Can I get back to that in the next meal? did I really mess everything up? And even just taking the time to ask that question can really be an interrupter in the sort of the automatic habits that we have developed that keep us going back to that cycle of dieting. I use a term, and I learned this from one of my coaches, that instead of thinking all or nothing, which is a very black and white way of looking at food, for example, in either or situation, I use something called good, better, and best. And right there, that takes us out of thinking that there's only two choices. And I have people identify this for themselves. So I'll give you a quick example. One of my one-on-one clients right now is working on drinking more water. It's a very simple, right? Mm-hmm. Very simple habit, but can make us feel a lot better. And so I have her define for her what is good, better, and best. So I'm like, think about for you, what is good, better. I want it to be driven by the client as much as possible, because you're going to get the best buy-in when somebody decides it for themselves and has the autonomy. And so I have her set good as something greater than 0. So that pulls us out of all or nothing to begin with. And so she thought, okay, I have this water bottle. It's 32 ounces. So for me, good is going to be 1 of those a day. Better will be 2 of those a day. And best is 3 of those a day. So she kind of gets to set those for herself, and it gives her more buy-in, and it keeps her out of thinking I either did it or I did not do it. If I didn't get all of it, then I'm just going to quit and who cares, right? Mm-hmm. So it can really help to develop your mental flexibility when you think about are there more than just 2 options here? What are those options? And so that gives us a sense of, if I get 1 bottle of water a day, like, is it the best that I could do? Probably not, but I'm still not going to be super harsh on myself. I at least did this. So I would recommend that for people, maybe even use that and apply that principle if you're working on developing that mental flexibility and getting out of all or nothing thinking. And just know it does take practice. You probably won't get it perfect.
It's so true, because I have had many patients and they'll say, we usually start them off, but for us, the food is always about what's going to make you feel good and what's not. It's never about, we don't talk about weight or, if someone says, I want to lose weight, we might ask them, but we're not like, that's not our focus. And you've probably never seen me post one thing about losing weight, because I just don't. But, someone will go, well, I was doing your low histamine plan and I was feeling so good. But then I went on vacation and I fell off the wagon. And so now all my symptoms are back. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, that's all right. Like the first thing I'm like, don't worry about it. Like I'm like, the good news is that it worked, I'm like, or, if it's like longer term like that, or someone's like, well, I had this and I'm like, it's fine. Like it's okay to do that. I'm like, beating yourself up about having something off is that's a bigger problem. I'm like, the stress is worse than what the food's going to do to you most of the time. I'm like, just eat what makes you feel good later, and they're like, oh, okay. It's just, I think it doesn't occur to people because we've been trained for so long that don't cheat, it's like everything's about cheating and, all that stuff. And it's just, and then people beat themselves up and they go down this rabbit hole and it's not necessary.
Yeah, there's definitely a deeper construct of food as a moral accomplishment that over the longer term can be helpful for people to tease that apart and think, where did, if I have this belief about food that if I eat whatever it is that I'm, not only is that thing bad, but I am bad. And that's the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is I did something bad. Shame is I am bad. And anybody who wants to learn more about that can go read Brene Brown. But
love her.
Yeah, I love her. And she talks a lot about shame, but you think about how shame intersects with food.
Oh yeah.
And how we have this almost moral purity that we're trying to reach, or we think we're good, or we're eating foods that are good. And when we put foods up on a pedestal, whether they're good or bad, our behavior starts to shift in interesting ways. And oftentimes the beliefs that we hold about food, the stories we tell ourselves about food, are not ones that we chose. I have
Right.
clients that were told these things when they were 5.
Yeah.
Right. Put on diets when they were 8,
Jeez.
etc. And this is very common. And so a lot of us we've been socialized into these beliefs. We've been programmed with these beliefs. And so unlearning them is an active process. And it's a, if you imagine a very beautifully woven, ornate rug, and you find one strand and you start to pull it, you'll start to notice how woven it is into everything else. And so you pull that thread a little bit at a time, and getting curious, why do I have this belief about this food? Where did it come from? This from myself? What kind of mental flexibility can I develop here? Those are all really important questions to ask.
Yeah. That was such a good analogy, by the way.
It was. I'm going to use that. That's good.
Yeah.
I love that.
I love a good analogy.
Me too. I'm so visual. So that is a really good analogy.
This was so great. You're really teaching people about balance. It's really, really good. So where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram. It's probably my most active place on social media. So that's Steph_Gaudreau, the Listen to Your Body podcast, which is on all major podcast apps. And then my website is stephgaudreau.com. I have some DIY programs, some group programs, and then I also have one-on-one coaching. People can find out more there.
Awesome. Awesome.
Well, thanks for coming on, Steph.
Yes,
Thank
this was
you.
Great.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
I've loved doing your podcast in the past. So I was like, we have to have that.
I always send those episodes from when you were on to people when they ask me about histamine or they ask me about thyroid. So thank you for sharing all the knowledge with everybody.
Yeah. And thank you.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thanks everyone for listening. Don't forget to leave a review, because the more reviews we have, the more people will find us and can, hear these types of things and learn that what Steph is talking about is the more, the way we really should be thinking and learning, these things we should be learning about. So if you like to review, and don't forget to mention Steph's specific podcast, because I love when people talk about the one episodes or whatever, that they liked specifically. So thanks everyone for listening, and thanks Steph for being on.
Thank
Bye.
you.